When my son said, "You're dead to me, old man," and uninvited me from his wedding, I realized I'd lost him to people who measured worth in dollar signs. His fiance's family treated him like a prince while treating me like a beggar. But after 40 years of inspecting construction sites, I recognized the illegal shortcuts in their million-dollar developments. One phone call to federal authorities changed everything. Suddenly, the dead old man was the only one who could save him. The rain drummed against my kitchen window as I stared at the text message that had arrived 15 minutes ago. 3 lines that cut deeper than any construction accident I'd survived. In 4 decades, don't come to the wedding. You're an embarrassment to our family. You're dead to me, old man. My coffee had gone cold while I read those words over and over. Marcus, my son, my only child, the boy I'd raised alone after his mother, died when he was 12. The same kid who used to beg me to take him to construction sites, who'd worn my oversized hard hat like a crown, who'd once told his teacher that his dad was the most important person in the world because he made sure buildings didn't fall down. Now, according to his text message, I was dead to him. I set the phone on my kitchen table next to a stack of building violation reports. The house felt eerily quiet except for the rain and the distant hum of evening traffic. Not much to look at, I'll admit. A modest 2-bedroom home in Queen Anne, everything I needed and nothing I didn't. The Castellano family probably spent more on their monthly wine budget than I made in 6 months as a city building inspector. The Castellanos, Victoria's family. The people who'd stolen my son with their mansion in Bellevue, their country club memberships, their casual wealth that made my middle-class life look like poverty. Marcus had been completely dazzled from the moment Victoria brought him home to meet her parents last Christmas. I remembered that phone call clearly. "Dad, you should see this place. It's incredible. Mr. Castellano builds luxury developments all over Seattle. He says there's always room in his company for smart, ambitious people." That should have been my first warning. When wealthy people start talking about your child's ambition, they're usually planning to use it for their own purposes. I picked up my phone and scrolled back through our text conversations. The progression was clear if you knew what to look for. Marcus had always been proud of my work before Victoria entered the picture. He'd bragged to his college friends about his dad, the construction inspector who kept people safe. But over the past 8 months, those messages had changed tone completely. January. Victoria's dad wants to meet you properly. Maybe we could have dinner somewhere really nice this time? February. The Castellanos are paying for my final semester. I know you were planning to help, but they insisted on covering everything. March. Dad, maybe you could update your wardrobe a little when you meet Victoria's family. They're kind of formal people who notice these things. April. I'm moving. In with Victoria after graduation. The Castellanos have a guest house that's bigger than, well, it's really nice. And now, May. You're dead to me, old man. Each message had been another step away from the son I'd raised and toward the man the Castellanos wanted him to become. Someone who was embarrassed by his father's modest house, his work clothes, his inspector's salary. Someone who saw dollar signs instead of integrity. I walked to my bedroom and opened the closet. My good suit hung there, the one I'd bought for Marcus's high school graduation. Navy blue, nothing fancy, but clean and respectable. I'd planned to wear it to his wedding. Next Saturday, had already taken the day off work, arranged for someone to cover my inspection route in Pioneer Square. But according to Marcus, I wouldn't be needed. Ever again. The thing about construction inspection is that you develop an eye for structural problems. Cracks in foundations, shortcuts in electrical work, places where builders tried to save money by cutting corners on safety regulations. After 40 years, I could spot trouble from across a job site. And for the past 8 months, every instinct I'd developed told me something was fundamentally wrong with the Castellano family. They were too smooth, too polished, too eager to insert themselves into my son's life. Real successful people didn't usually need to prove how successful they were. They didn't shower college students with expensive gifts and job promises. They didn't work so hard to isolate young men from their families. I opened my laptop, an old Dell that took forever to boot up. The internet connection wasn't much, but it was enough for basic research. I'd been meaning to look into Castellano construction for months, but work had kept me busy. Tonight, I had nothing but time and a growing suspicion that my son was walking into something dangerous. The company website loaded slowly. Professional photos of luxury developments, testimonials from satisfied clients, a corporate history that painted Antonio Castellano as a self-made success story. Everything looked legitimate. Impressive, even. The kind of company any father would be proud to have his son join, but I'd learned long ago that the prettiest facades often hide the worst structural problems. I clicked through their portfolio. Castellano Luxury Estates in Bellevue. Castellano. Heights overlooking the Sound. Castellano Commons in South Lake Union. Dozens of high-end developments, each one more expensive than the last. The profit margins had to be enormous. In construction, enormous profits usually meant corners were being cut somewhere that inspectors couldn't easily see. I opened a new browser window and logged into the City Building Department database. My inspector credentials gave me access to violation reports, safety complaints, and permit histories. I typed Castellano Construction into the search field and hit enter. What came back made me sit up straighter in my chair. 17 safety violations in the past 2 years. Code violations for substandard materials, fines for unpermitted electrical work, citations for inadequate foundation reinforcement. Each violation had been quietly settled with small fines, the kind of business expense wealthy developers factored into their profit calculations. But together, they painted a clear picture of systematic corner cutting that prioritized profits over safety. I clicked on the most recent violation report. Castellano Heights, the waterfront development Marcus had mentioned with such excitement. The foundation work had failed inspection twice before being reluctantly approved by a different inspector. The electrical systems had been installed without proper permits. The plumbing had been connected to the municipal system through unauthorized methods that violated environmental regulations. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through page after page of documented safety violations. People were living in these buildings, families, children, elderly residents who trusted that their expensive homes had been built to code. They had no idea they were living in structures that cut every possible corner to maximize developer profits. I grabbed a notepad and started documenting what I found: building addresses, violation dates, inspector names. A pattern emerged quickly that made my blood run cold. Most of the serious violations had been handled by the same few inspectors, guys I'd worked with for years who'd suddenly become very accommodating to Castellano projects. I opened the inspection reports for these projects. Clean approvals, no violations noted, glowing assessments of construction quality. Completely different from what the violation database showed. Either these inspectors had suddenly become incompetent, or someone was paying them to file false reports. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, hope fluttered in my chest. Maybe Marcus had reconsidered. Maybe he wanted to talk this through like adults. Instead, it was Victoria. Mr. Patterson, Marcus told me about your conversation today. I think it's better this way. He deserves a family that can support his ambitions, not hold him back with small-town thinking. The Castellanos have given him opportunities you never could. Please respect his decision and don't contact him again. I stared at the message until the words blurred. Victoria had written it with the casual cruelty of someone who'd never struggled for anything in her life. To her, I wasn't a man who'd raised a son alone, worked double shifts to pay for his education, sacrificed everything to give him opportunities. I was just an obstacle to be eliminated from his bright future. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed I was powerless. I spent the next 6 hours deep in city records, building permits, safety inspections, contractor licenses, environmental reports. The deeper I dug, the clearer the pattern became. The Castellano empire was built on systematic fraud that endangered every family living in their developments. The Bellevue project was built with foundation concrete that wouldn't meet earthquake safety standards. The South Lake Union towers used electrical systems that violated current fire safety codes. The waterfront condos had been connected to a sewage system that had been condemned for environmental violations. But the most damning evidence involved a project I'd personally inspected 2 years ago. The Aurora Gardens development in Capitol Hill was supposed to be Castellano's showcase affordable housing project, 60 units selling for $400,000 to $600,000, marketed to young professionals and small families. The architectural plans looked impressive, calling for high-end materials and premium construction throughout. I'd been assigned to inspect the structural work after neighbors complained about construction noise during off hours. What I'd found was shocking. The support beams were made from steel that didn't meet load-bearing specifications for a building of that height. The concrete was mixed with fly ash content that exceeded safety limits, creating foundations that would deteriorate within 10 years instead of lasting decades. When I'd written up the violations and ordered work to stop until corrections were made, Antonio Castellano had called my supervisor within hours. By the next morning, I'd been reassigned to different projects across town, and another inspector had approved the Aurora Gardens work without ordering any changes. I'd filed a complaint with the city's Internal Affairs Office, documenting my ASG findings and questioning the decision to overrule my safety concerns. The complaint had disappeared into bureaucratic limbo, and I'd been quietly discouraged from pursuing the matter further. At the time, I'd assumed it was typical municipal politics. Developers had influence, and inspectors who made waves faced career consequences. But now, armed with evidence of systematic corruption, I realized Aurora Gardens represented something much more serious than bureaucratic favoritism. I pulled out my old inspection files and found my original report on Aurora Gardens, detailed. Photographs of the substandard steel beams, lab test results showing excessive fly ash in the concrete, calculations proving the structural work wouldn't meet long-term safety requirements. All the evidence needed to demonstrate that 60 families had purchased homes with compromised foundations and unsafe support structures. More importantly, I had documentation proving that Antonio Castellano knew about the problems and had used his influence to override legitimate safety concerns. This wasn't just about building codes or municipal corruption. This was about families who'd invested their life savings in homes that might collapse during the next major earthquake. Children sleeping in bedrooms supported by steel beams that couldn't handle the building's actual weight. Antonio Castellano hadn't just bought off inspectors and circumvented regulations. He'd potentially created death traps to maximize profits, and he'd gotten away with it because inspectors like me didn't have enough political power to fight back effectively. But I wasn't just any inspector anymore. I was a father whose son had been turned against him by people who measured worth in dollar signs while ignoring basic human decency and professional ethics. I opened a new document and began typing a comprehensive report documenting 2 years of evidence against Castellano: construction, code violations, permit irregularities, inspector payoffs, substandard materials, compromised structural integrity. All of it organized with the methodical precision I'd developed during 4 decades of professional documentation. The report ran 31 pages when completed, supported by photographs, test results, inspection records, and public documents. It painted a devastating picture of systematic corruption that had enriched the Castellano family while potentially endangering hundreds of Seattle families. More importantly, it represented the kind of evidence that could trigger federal investigations into construction fraud, municipal corruption, and public safety violations. I saved the document and created backup copies on 2 different flash drives. Then I began researching the appropriate recipients for this information: the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division, the Washington State Attorney General's Construction Fraud Unit, the Seattle Times Investigative Team, and the City Council's Oversight Committee. But first, I had one phone call to make. I dialed Marcus's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the same strained formality that had characterized our recent conversations. "Hi, Dad. Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, Marcus. I'm calling to congratulate you on your upcoming wedding. I know how important this day is for you and Victoria." Pause. He'd expected anger, recriminations, emotional manipulation. Instead, I sounded calm, almost cheerful. "Thank you, Dad. That means a lot coming from you. I want you to know that I understand your position completely. The Castellanos have been very generous to you, and you don't want to do anything that might jeopardize your relationship with them." "Dad, it's not that simple." "Oh, but it is simple, Marcus. You've chosen wealth and status over family loyalty. Victoria's parents can give you things I never could: money, connections, business opportunities. I completely understand the appeal." Another pause. "Dad, you sound different tonight." "Do I?" "Well, I've had time to think about our conversation. You're absolutely right that appearances matter to people like the Castellanos. They judge everything: clothes, cars, neighborhoods, professions. They need to maintain certain standards to protect their reputation. Exactly. I knew you'd understand. Eventually. I understand perfectly. People who built their fortune through systematic construction fraud and municipal corruption can't afford to have honest building inspectors at their family gatherings. It might raise uncomfortable questions about their business practices. The white line went completely silent. I could practically hear Marcus's brain processing what I'd just said. Dad, what are you talking about? I'm talking about your future father-in-law's business practices, Marcus. Did you know that Antonio Castellano has been systematically bribing city inspectors for at least 2 years? Did you know that he's used substandard materials in residential developments, potentially compromising the structural integrity of hundreds of homes? That can't be true. It's completely true, Marcus. I have 31 pages of documentation proving systematic construction fraud, inspector payoffs, and safety code violations. The Aurora Gardens development alone represents enough criminal activity to put Antonio Castellano in federal prison for a decade. Marcus's breathing became audible over the phone. Dad, you can't be serious about this. I'm completely serious. The man whose approval you value so highly, the man whose business you're planning to join, the man who considers me too embarrassing for polite society. He's a criminal who's been defrauding Seattle homebuyers while endangering their family's safety. This is insane. You're making this up because you're angry about the wedding situation. Marcus, I've spent 4 decades documenting construction violations and safety hazards. I know the difference between legitimate business practices and criminal fraud. Your future father-in-law is a crook who's been buying off city officials to avoid accountability for work that could kill people. Even if some violations occurred, which I don't believe, that's just business. Every developer cuts corners sometimes to stay competitive. Cutting corners is using slightly cheaper fixtures, Marcus. Bribing inspectors and using compromised structural materials is criminal fraud that endangers people's lives. Silence. Marcus knew enough about construction from growing up around my work to understand the implications of what I was describing. Does your college education tell you it's acceptable to use steel beams that don't meet load-bearing specifications in residential construction? More silence. Marcus, you've built your new life on money obtained through criminal activity that could collapse buildings. The expensive car, the luxury apartment, the prestigious job offer, all of it funded by fraud that could kill families during the next major earthquake. Dad, stop! You're scaring me with these accusations. I'm not trying to scare you, Marcus. I'm trying to save you from making the biggest mistake of your life. You're about to marry into a criminal family, join a fraudulent business, and build your career on foundations that are literally and figuratively unsound. What do you want? Me to do about it? For the first time in months, Marcus sounded like my son again. Uncertain, worried, looking for guidance instead of dismissing my concerns. I want you to postpone the wedding until you've had time to investigate these allegations properly. I want you to demand full transparency from Antonio Castellano about his business practices. I want you to remember that integrity matters more than wealth. I can't postpone the wedding, Dad. Everything's planned, deposits paid, invitations sent. 300 people are expecting. Marcus, if Antonio Castellano is arrested for federal construction fraud next week, do you really want to be legally connected to his family when it happens? Arrested? Dad, what exactly are you planning to do? I'm planning to fulfill my professional obligations, Marcus. I've discovered evidence of systematic criminal activity that endangers public safety. I have a legal and moral duty to report that information to appropriate federal authorities. You're going to try to destroy Antonio's business? I'm going to provide evidence of criminal activity to law enforcement agencies. What they do with that information is their decision to make. Dad, please don't do this. Think about what this will do to me, to my career, to my future with Victoria and her family. I am thinking about your future, Marcus. I'm trying to prevent you from building that future on criminal foundations that will eventually collapse and destroy everything you think you've achieved. What if I reconsidered your invitation to the wedding? Would that change anything about your plans? I'd been waiting for this moment, the point where Marcus realized his dead father held cards that could destroy his new life. It's too late for that kind of gesture, Marcus. You made your choice when you decided I was too embarrassing for your fancy wedding. You chose the Castellanos over your father, wealth over integrity, appearance over substance. Dad, I'm sorry about what I said. I was wrong to uninvite you. Please, let's talk about this situation in person before you do anything irreversible. There's nothing left to discuss, Marcus. I raised you to understand the difference between right and wrong, legal and illegal, ethical and corrupt. If you can't see those distinctions clearly anymore, then maybe some time in federal prison will help clarify your thinking. Federal prison? What do you mean? Construction fraud involving federal housing programs is a federal crime, Marcus. The Aurora Gardens project received federal affordable housing tax credits while using substandard materials that endangered residents. That makes it a federal case with severe penalties. I could hear Marcus's sharp intake of breath as the full scope of his situation became clear to him. How long do I have before you file these reports? I'm planning to make those calls first. Thing tomorrow morning. FBI first, then the State Attorney General's office, then the Seattle Times investigative team. Dad, please. Give me 48 hours to sort this situation out. Let me talk to Victoria, figure out what's actually true, explore what options we might have. What options, Marcus? You can't undo 2 years of systematic criminal activity. You can't repay the families whose homes are built on compromised foundations. You can't restore the integrity that Antonio Castellano destroyed when he decided profits mattered more than human safety. Maybe I can convince him to fix the problems voluntarily, make restitution to affected families. Marcus, you're not listening to what I'm telling you. This isn't about fixing problems or making restitution. This is about systematic criminal fraud that's been going on for years. The only appropriate response is full criminal prosecution. So there's nothing I can do to stop this from happening? You could have stopped this, Marcus. If you'd valued integrity over wealth, family loyalty, over social status, truth over convenient lies. But you made your choices. And now you get to live with the consequences. Dad, I know I hurt your feelings, but destroying my entire life won't fix our relationship. I'm not destroying your life, Marcus. I'm giving you an opportunity to rebuild it on honest foundations for once. Walk away from the Castellanos. Find legitimate employment. Remember the values your mother and I spent 18 years teaching you. And if I refuse to do that, then you'll learn firsthand what federal investigators think about construction fraud and municipal corruption schemes. The phone line went quiet except for Marcus's heavy breathing. Marcus, are you still there? I'm here, Dad. I need time to process all of this information. Take all the time you want to process it, but my phone calls to federal authorities get made tomorrow morning regardless of what you decide. I understand the situation now. Do you? Do you really understand what's at stake here? My entire life is at stake. No, Marcus, your entire fake life is at stake. The life built on criminal money, corrupt relationships, and moral compromises. Your real life, the one based on integrity, hard work, and genuine accomplishments, that's still possible if you have the courage to choose it. It's not that simple to walk away from everything. It's exactly that simple. Choose honesty or choose corruption. Choose family or choose criminals. Choose integrity or choose fraud. Simple choices, Marcus. But I understand they're not easy ones to make. I'll call you back tomorrow after I've had time to think. You do that, Marcus. And when you call tomorrow, you might want to have a different perspective on which of us is really embarrassing to be associated with. I hung up the phone and returned to my laptop, where 31 pages of criminal evidence waited to destroy the Castellano family empire. Tomorrow morning would bring phone calls that would change everything for Marcus, Victoria, and Antonio Castellano. But tonight, for the first time in months, I felt like a father again. A father whose son was about to learn the most important lesson of his life. That integrity matters more than wealth, and that some foundations can't support the weight of compromised values forever. The phone started ringing at 6:23 a.m. the next morning. Marcus, calling earlier than promised, probably hoping to catch me before I made those calls to federal authorities. I let it ring while I made coffee and prepared my breakfast, following my usual morning routine with deliberate calm. The ringing stopped, then started again immediately. Then again. By the time I sat down with my coffee and the morning newspaper, Marcus had called 9 times without leaving any messages. At 7:30, I finally answered. "Good morning, Marcus." "Dad, thank God you picked up. I've been trying to reach you for over an hour." "I know. I wanted to give you time to think about your situation while I prepared for what promises to be a very busy day." "Dad, I talked to Victoria for most of the night. We discussed everything you told me about her father's business practices. And what did she have to say about it?" "She says it's completely impossible. Antonio's never been involved in anything illegal or unethical. He's a respected businessman, active in charity work, serves on multiple civic boards." "Marcus, criminals often hide behind respectable public facades. Community involvement and charity work provide excellent cover for illegal business practices." "But think about this logically, Dad. If Antonio were really involved in systematic fraud like you're claiming, wouldn't other inspectors have caught it by now? Wouldn't there be ongoing investigations, news reports, criminal charges already filed?" I appreciated the irony of his question. "Other inspectors did catch it, Marcus. I caught it myself. The problem is what happened to those inspectors afterward." "What do you mean by that?" "I mean inspectors who documented serious violations in Castellano projects found themselves mysteriously reassigned to different areas, demoted to less important roles, or encouraged to find employment elsewhere. Meanwhile, inspectors who overlooked obvious problems discovered lucrative opportunities in the private consulting sector. That's just speculation, not actual proof of wrongdoing. It's documented fact, Marcus. I have employment records, inspection, histories, and financial connections proving a systematic pattern of corruption spanning 2 full years." Marcus was quiet for several long seconds. "Even if some irregularities occurred in the past, that doesn't necessarily prove systematic fraud was involved. Marcus, I have 31 pages documenting systematic violations across multiple developments. This isn't about isolated incidents or minor procedural problems. Dad, please, I'm begging you here. Don't file those reports today. Give me just 1 week to investigate this properly, to talk directly to Antonio, to get his side of the story before you destroy everything." "His side of the story?" "Marcus, what possible explanation could justify bribing municipal inspectors and using substandard structural materials in residential buildings? Maybe there are legitimate explanations you haven't considered. Maybe there are extenuating circumstances that make things look worse than they actually are." The desperation in his voice was painful to hear. My son, faced with overwhelming evidence that his new life was built on criminal foundations, was grasping for any rationalization that would let him avoid uncomfortable truths. "Marcus, let me ask you something. If I showed you 31 pages of evidence proving that a city inspector was taking bribes and deliberately ignoring safety violations, what would you think about that inspector?" "I'd think he was completely corrupt and dangerous to public safety. But when I show you 31 pages of evidence proving that a developer was systematically paying those bribes and creating those safety violations, you want to give him the benefit of the doubt? Silence. The only difference between these two situations is that you're personally invested in believing Antonio Castellano is honest. But evidence doesn't change based on our personal preferences or financial interests, Marcus. Dad, what if..." He paused, struggling with something. "What if I told you I was reconsidering the entire relationship? What if I was thinking about calling off the wedding and walking away from everything?" For a moment, hope flickered in my chest. Maybe my son was finally seeing clearly, finally ready to choose integrity over wealth. "Marcus, are you serious about that?" "I don't know, maybe. If what you're saying is really true, if Antonio is actually involved in criminal activity, then I couldn't marry Victoria. I couldn't be part of a family like that." "You'd be willing to walk away from everything? The job? Offer? The money? The lifestyle they've shown you? I'd have to, wouldn't I? If they're criminals, then everything I've gained through them is tainted. Everything I thought I'd achieved would be based on fraud." For the first time in months, Marcus sounded like the son I'd raised. Thoughtful, ethical, willing to make difficult choices based on principles rather than profit. "Yes, Marcus? If they're criminals, you'd have to walk away from all of it." "But Dad, I need to be absolutely certain before I destroy my entire life. Can you give me 24 hours to verify your allegations myself? Just one day to confront Antonio directly and get definitive answers? I considered his request carefully. 24 hours seemed reasonable if he was genuinely investigating rather than just buying time to figure out damage control. What exactly would you do in those 24 hours? I'd confront Antonio directly about the specific violations you mentioned. Demand to see inspection records, permits, documentation that would either prove or disprove your allegations. If he's innocent, he should be able to explain everything clearly. And if he can't provide satisfactory explanations, then I call off the wedding immediately and walk away from everything connected to his family and business. The sincerity in his voice convinced me that this wasn't manipulation or delay tactics. This was my son finally taking responsibility for making an informed decision about his future. All right, Marcus, 24 hours. But I want you to understand something. If Antonio tries to explain away systematic criminal activity or convince you that fraud is just normal business practice, that tells you everything you need to know about his character. I understand completely. And Dad? What is it? Thank you for caring enough about my future to risk our relationship by telling me these difficult truths. 24 hours later, Marcus called back with a voice I barely recognized. Hollow, devastated, but somehow clearer than it had been in months. Dad, you were right about absolutely everything. I'd been expecting this call, but hearing the pain in his voice still affected me deeply. What happened when you confronted him? I went to Antonio's office yesterday evening and asked him directly about Aurora Gardens, about the inspection irregularities, about the inspectors who'd left city employment after working on his projects. How did he respond initially? First, he denied everything completely, said you were a bitter old man making false accusations because you were jealous of our family's success and angry about being excluded from the wedding. But that didn't satisfy your questions. No, it didn't. I pressed him for specific details, asked him to show me inspection records, permit documentation, anything that would contradict your allegations definitively. Marcus paused, and I could hear him struggling with the memory. Dad, he got furious, really genuinely angry. Started yelling about ungrateful employees and bureaucratic inspectors who didn't understand that successful business required flexible approaches to regulatory challenges. He admitted to circumventing regulations. Worse than that, he bragged about it. Said the construction industry required creative solutions for dealing with overzealous government officials. He talked about inspector payments like they were normal business operating expenses. I felt physically sick. Even knowing Antonio was corrupt, hearing about his casual attitude toward public safety violations was deeply disturbing. What about the structural safety issues? Did he address the compromised materials and substandard construction? Dad, he laughed when I brought up foundation integrity and earthquake safety standards. Actually laughed. Said modern homebuyers were too ignorant to understand technical construction details, and that building codes were just government overreach designed to increase development costs unnecessarily. The callousness was breathtaking. Antonio Castellano wasn't just cutting corners to increase profits. He was deliberately endangering families while mocking the safety regulations designed to protect them from structural collapse. How did Victoria react when she heard him admit to these things? Another long pause. She defended him completely, Dad. Even after hearing him openly admit to bribing inspectors and ignoring safety codes, she insisted he was just being a smart businessman who understood how to work within the system. So she knew about the criminal activity? She knew, and she didn't care at all. When I said I couldn't marry into a family involved in systematic criminal activity, she called me naive and self-righteous. Said I was letting my father's working-class mentality ruin my opportunity for real success and social advancement. Phrase working-class mentality stung, but I was proud that Marcus had recognized it as an insult rather than accepting it as legitimate criticism. What did you tell her in response? I told her that integrity wasn't determined by social class, and that success built on criminal activity wasn't real success at all. Then I returned her engagement ring and left their house permanently. Marcus, I'm genuinely proud of you for making that choice. Are you really? Even though I wasted almost a year of my life chasing wealth and status instead of remembering The basic values you taught me? I'm proud because when it mattered most, when you were faced with the ultimate test of character, you chose integrity over wealth. It takes real courage to walk away from everything you thought you wanted. Dad, I'm so sorry for everything. The terrible things I said to you, the way I treated you, uninviting you from the wedding because I was ashamed of your honest work. I was completely awful. You were influenced by people who measure human worth in dollar signs, Marcus. But you found your way back to what really matters when you had to make the choice that would define your character permanently. What happens now? With Antonio, I mean. Are you still planning to file those federal reports? I'd been wrestling with the same question. My original motivation had been to protect my son from criminals and perhaps teach him a lesson about choosing integrity over wealth. Now that Marcus had walked away from the Castellanos voluntarily, did I still need to pursue criminal prosecution? Marcus, those reports aren't just about protecting you anymore. There are hundreds of families living in buildings with compromised structural integrity, dozens more who are planning to purchase homes in developments that don't meet basic safety standards. These people deserve to know their homes might not survive the next major earthquake. You're right, Dad. Antonio needs to face serious consequences for what he's done to innocent families. More importantly, the systematic corruption needs to be exposed and stopped before it spreads to other developers. If there are no consequences for this kind of fraud, other companies will adopt similar practices. Dad, there's something else. You should know. After I left Victoria's house last night, I found 4 messages on my phone, all from city inspectors who somehow knew I'd been asking questions about Castellano construction. What kind of messages were they? Warning messages. Basically, they'd apparently heard that I was asking uncomfortable questions about Antonio's business practices. 3 of them warned me to be careful about making accusations I couldn't prove. The 4th one was more direct. He said people who caused problems for important developers sometimes found their careers taking unexpected negative turns. The implications were deeply troubling. Antonio's corruption network was apparently more extensive than I'd realized, with multiple city employees willing to intimidate anyone who threatened their profitable arrangement. Marcus, did you recognize any of the voices? One of them identified himself directly. Tom Bradley from the Electrical Inspection Division. Tom Bradley. I knew him professionally, a 15-year veteran who'd always seemed competent and ethical. If he was part of Antonio's corruption network, the problem went much deeper than I'd originally thought. Dad, how many city employees do you think are involved in this? I honestly don't know, but we're about to find out. This kind of systematic corruption requires participation across multiple departments and administrative levels. Inspectors, permit clerks, supervisors, possibly even senior administrators. What if they try to discredit your allegations? What if they claim your accusations are motivated by personal revenge because of the wedding situation? It was a legitimate concern that I'd already considered. Antonio's network had successfully silenced whistleblowers before by questioning their motives and professional credibility. That's exactly why I documented everything with photographs, official city records, and independent verification from multiple sources. Personal motivation doesn't change physical evidence or public's lie. Documents that anyone can examine. Dad, I want to help with this investigation. I want to do whatever I can to make sure Antonio faces appropriate justice for endangering all those families. The offer surprised me, but I wasn't sure it was wise. Marcus, getting directly involved could permanently damage your career prospects. The architecture and construction community in Seattle is relatively small, and Antonio has professional connections throughout the industry. I don't care about my career prospects in Seattle anymore, Dad. After what I've learned about how this industry actually operates, I couldn't continue working here knowing that buildings around me might be structurally unsafe because of corruption. I helped cover up by staying silent. What are you thinking about doing specifically? I still have access to internal Castellano construction files through my work computer account. Architectural plans, material specifications, cost estimates, correspondence with city officials. If I can copy those files before they realize I'm no longer part of their family, it might provide crucial additional evidence for investigators. The suggestion was legally risky but potentially valuable. Marcus, accessing company files after Ending your employment relationship could be considered theft or corporate espionage. Dad, my employment doesn't officially end until next Friday. Technically, I still work for Castellano Construction for 5 more days. And if those files document ongoing criminal activity that endangers public safety, don't I have a moral obligation to preserve that evidence? He was right about the timeline, and potentially right about the moral obligation. Evidence of criminal activity that could harm innocent families shouldn't be protected by corporate confidentiality agreements. What kind of files are we talking about specifically? Everything that matters. Project budgets showing the actual cost of materials versus what was specified in the original architectural plans. Email correspondence between Antonio and various city officials. Payment records for consulting fees that might actually be disguised bribes. Internal memos discussing regulatory challenges and strategies for handling difficult inspectors. Marcus, if you're going to do this, you need to be extremely careful. Copy everything to external drives, document the dates and sources, and make sure you can't be accused of altering anything. I understand completely. And Dad? What? After I gather this evidence, I want to be there when you present it to federal authorities. I want to take responsibility for my involvement with these people, but I also want to help ensure they face justice. For the first time in over a year, I felt genuinely proud of my son. He was choosing integrity over comfort, truth over convenience. All right, Marcus, but we do this properly, legally, with full documentation. No shortcuts. Agreed. I'll start copying files first thing tomorrow morning. 2 days later, Marcus arrived at my house carrying a laptop and 3 external hard drives. He looked exhausted but determined, like someone who'd spent sleepless nights doing the right thing despite the personal cost. Did you get everything we need? Everything and more, Dad. The corruption goes deeper than we imagined. Antonio hasn't just been cutting corners, he's been systematically rewriting safety rules through bribery and intimidation. We spent the next hour organizing evidence for different agencies. FBI for federal violations, State Attorney General for municipal corruption, EPA for environmental fraud, Seattle Times for public exposure. Marcus, there's something you should see, I said, pulling out a folder. I found additional evidence while you were gathering those files. What kind of additional evidence? Remember the Aurora Gardens project I mentioned? I discovered that 3 families living there have already reported foundation cracks and structural problems. One family's basement flooded because the waterproofing failed. Another family noticed their walls separating from the foundation during last month's minor earthquake. Marcus's face went pale. People are already being hurt by Antonio's fraud. It's starting, Marcus. The substandard materials are failing exactly as I predicted they would. Within 5 years, some of these buildings could become uninhabitable. Within 10 years, they could collapse entirely. Dad, we have to stop this. Immediately. We can't wait another day. At 2 p.m., I made the first call. FBI Seattle Field Office, Agent Patricia Coleman speaking. Agent Coleman, my name is James Patterson. I'm calling to report systematic construction fraud involving federal housing programs and municipal corruption. Sir, what type of evidence are you reporting? Documented bribery of city officials, falsified inspection reports, substandard materials in federally subsidized housing, environmental fraud, and ongoing structural failures that endanger residents' safety. That's very comprehensive. How much documentation do you have? Approximately 200 pages of financial records, inspection reports, email correspondence, and photographic evidence, plus computer files showing systematic violations across dozens of projects spanning 2 years. Mr. Patterson, this sounds like a significant case. Can you come to our office this afternoon? Agent Coleman, I'll be there at 4 p.m. with my son, who has additional evidence from inside the company in question. We'll be ready for you. The FBI Seattle field office occupied several floors of the federal building downtown. Agent Patricia Coleman met us in the lobby, a serious woman in her 40s who exuded competent professionalism. Mr. Patterson, she said, shaking both our hands. I understand you have evidence of systematic construction fraud? Agent Coleman, we have evidence of the largest municipal corruption case in Seattle's history. She led us to A secure conference room where two other agents waited with recording equipment and laptops ready to process digital evidence. For the next 4 hours, we walked them through everything. The Aurora Gardens Foundation problems, the inspector payoff schemes, the falsified environmental reports, the systematic bribery of city officials, the federal housing credit fraud, the structural failures that were already beginning to appear. Agent Coleman's expression grew more serious with each piece of evidence we presented. Mr. Patterson, in 15 years with the Bureau's white-collar crime unit, I've rarely seen corruption this systematic and well-documented. This could be the largest municipal fraud case we've handled in the Pacific Northwest. What happens next? Marcus asked. Next, we begin a federal investigation that will likely take months to complete, but will result in criminal charges for everyone involved. Mr. Patterson, your evidence gathering has been exemplary. Mr. Patterson, your decision to come forward, despite your personal relationship with the subjects, shows remarkable integrity. Agent Coleman, there's something else you should know, I said. The primary subject of this investigation, Antonio Castellano, was scheduled to become my son's father-in-law. My son walked away from that relationship yesterday when he learned about the criminal activity. I see. So this isn't just about construction fraud. It's about family betrayal and personal courage. It's about choosing integrity over wealth, Marcus said quietly. My father tried to warn me about these people, but I was too blinded by money to listen. By the time I realized he was right, I'd almost become part of their criminal enterprise. Tja. Coleman nodded. Both of you should know that this investigation will likely take over a year to complete. There will be grand jury testimony, depositions, potentially a trial where you'll need to testify publicly. Are you both prepared for that level of involvement? Agent Coleman, I said, I've spent 40 years ensuring that buildings in this city meet safety standards. If my testimony helps ensure that developers meet legal and ethical standards, then testifying is just the final phase of my career. And you, Mr. Patterson? I'm prepared to take responsibility for my involvement with these people and to help ensure they face consequences for endangering public safety. The investigation that followed was swift and devastating. Within a week, FBI agents had executed search warrants at Castellano construction offices. Within a month, Antonio Castellano was arrested on 18 counts of federal fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. 7 city officials were charged with corruption-related crimes. The Aurora Gardens residents filed a class action lawsuit that resulted in $23 million for complete structural repairs and safety upgrades. Environmental groups demanded comprehensive reviews of all waterfront developments approved through Antonio's falsified impact studies. Marcus found a position with a Portland architecture firm that specialized in sustainable, community-focused development. His new employers were impressed by his willingness to sacrifice personal advancement for ethical principles. 3 months later, federal prosecutors announced additional indictments. Victoria Castellano was charged with money laundering for her involvement in disguising bribe payments as consulting fees. Her mother, Elena Castellano, faced tax evasion charges for unreported income from the fraudulent schemes. Victoria called Marcus once during this period, screaming accusations about betrayal and family destruction. Marcus listened patiently, then said, Victoria, your father is a criminal who endangered innocent families for profit. I'm sorry you can't see that, but I'm not sorry for exposing him. She never called again. 6 months later, I received the call I'd been waiting for from Agent Coleman. Mr. Patterson, I wanted to personally update you on the case. Antonio Castellano pled guilty yesterday to federal racketeering charges. He'll serve at least 12 years in federal prison. What about the other defendants and the victims? Most co-conspirators are pleading guilty in exchange for cooperation. The city officials face shorter sentences but permanent disbarment from municipal employment. Victoria Castellano received 3 years for money laundering. The class action settlement will fund complete structural repairs for all affected buildings, and environmental remediation will restore waterfront areas damaged by illegal development practices. Agent Coleman, there's something I need to ask. Was all of this worth it? The destroyed relationships, the careers ended, the families broken apart? Mr. Patterson, our investigation identified structural problems in over 400 residential units, environmental damage affecting thousands of acres of waterfront, and corruption that undermined public safety oversight for years. Your decision to come forward prevented future tragedies and restored integrity to Seattle's development process. Yes, it was absolutely worth it. That evening, Marcus called for our weekly conversation. Dad, I've been thinking about something. After the trial concludes, would you consider moving to Portland? There's a consulting firm here that trains building inspectors in sustainable construction practices. They need experienced professionals. That sounds wonderful, Marcus, but I have one condition. What's that? No more fancy restaurants. If we're rebuilding our relationship, we do it over pizza and beer. Marcus laughed. Genuine laughter I hadn't heard in over a year. Dad, that's a deal. And there's something else. Sarah and I are expecting our first child. Marcus, that's incredible news. When? Spring. We've already decided on a name if it's a girl. Grace Elizabeth Patterson. Grace for the kindness we hope she shows others. Elizabeth for the grandmother. She'll never meet but whose values will pass along. Your mother would love that name. Dad, Sarah, and I want Grace to grow up hearing stories about her grandfather, the building inspector who chose integrity over comfort, family over fear, truth over convenience. 1 year later, I was packing my belongings for the move to Portland when I found a letter that had been delivered the previous day. The return address showed it was from the Washington State Building Inspectors Association. Inside was a formal certificate naming me the recipient of their annual Integrity in Public Service Award, recognizing exceptional courage in exposing systematic corruption that threatened public safety. The certificate was signed by dozens of building inspectors from across the state, colleagues who understood the personal and professional risks involved in challenging powerful developers and corrupt officials. But the most meaningful part was a handwritten note attached. Mr. Patterson, your actions reminded all of us why we became building inspectors. Not for wealth or status, but to protect families and communities. Thank you for showing us that integrity still matters more than money. Tom Bradley, electrical inspector. Tom Bradley, the same inspector who'd called Marcus with intimidating warnings. The investigation had given him the courage to break free from Antonio's corruption network and remember his professional obligations. As I taped up the last box of belongings, my phone rang one final time from my Seattle house. Dad, are you ready for tomorrow's drive to Portland? More than ready, Marcus. How's Sarah feeling? Great. The doctor says Grace is developing perfectly. She's due in 6 weeks. I can't wait to meet my granddaughter. Dad, there's something I want you to know. When Grace is old enough to understand, I'm going to tell her the story of how her grandfather saved her father from making the worst mistake of his life. Marcus, you saved yourself by choosing integrity over wealth when it mattered most, only because you refused to let me forget the values you and Mom taught me. As I hung up the phone and turned off the lights in my Seattle home for the last time, I realized that the text message that had seemed like an ending, "You're dead," to me, old man, had actually been a beginning. The beginning of a federal investigation that cleaned up municipal corruption and protected innocent families. The beginning of justice for residents living in unsafe housing. The beginning of environmental restoration for damaged waterfront areas. Most importantly, the beginning of my son's return to the values that truly mattered. Sometimes being dead, to people who measure worth in dollar signs, allows you to come alive for those who understand that integrity, family, and truth are the only currencies that really count. Today, Antonio Castellano is serving 12 years in federal prison for racketeering and construction fraud. Victoria moved to California where she works in commercial development, required to disclose her family's criminal history to all clients and regulatory agencies. Marcus is now a senior partner at Portland's most respected sustainable architecture firm, specializing in affordable housing that meets the highest safety standards while remaining accessible to working families. And I am James Patterson, 73 years old, part-time building inspector trainer, full-time grandfather to baby Grace, and living proof that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to compromise your integrity, no matter how much it costs. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. To listen to another story, click on the video suggestion that appears on your screen. Thank you for listening.